The pre-dawn chill of the Arizona desert settled over the Redmond Ranch, a sprawling piece of land near the Mexico border. Inside the modest but sturdy ranch house, all was quiet. John Redmond, a rugged man in his late 50s, lay in bed, half awake, listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch. His wife, Linda, slept peacefully beside him. The tranquility was shattered by the distant sound of gunfire echoing out of the desert. John was out of bed in an instant, his heart pounding. "Linda, wake up!" he hissed, shaking her awake. A couple of the ranch hands who were doing the fence patrol this morning burst into the house through the front door by the sound of it. "John, wake up! John!" one of the hands shouted. A new guy John had only just hired a week or so before. "Get everyone up! We're under attack!" he shouted. His calls were cut off by a burst of rifle fire and a loud thud as his body hit the floor. "Get the girls to the panic room, now!" Linda's eyes flew open and she nodded, quickly rousing their daughters, Emily and Sarah, from their rooms. The girls, ages 22 and 12, respectively, were groggy but moved swiftly, fear sharpening their senses. Linda ushered them into the panic room, a fortified space designed for just such emergencies, taking a rifle and bag of supplies. John grabbed his AR-15 from beneath the bed, his mind racing. This wasn't the first time they had been threatened by cartel members trespassing on their land, but it had never escalated to gunfire. As he moved through the house, he heard the sound of the front door being kicked in. "Mark! David, get up! We're under attack!" John shouted, rousing his two sons. Mark, 25, and David, 17, scrambled from their beds, grabbing their rifles from the gun cabinet. The attackers were already in the house. John could hear the muffled sounds of hushed Spanish and heavy footsteps as they moved through the rooms. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. Mark joined him at the top of the stairs, his face set in grim determination. "They're in the living room, Dad." His voice was hushed but full of anxiety and the last traces of sleep. John nodded. "We'll go room by room. We're going to slice the pie." "Do you remember how to do that?" John asked. His two sons nodded. "Okay. Then stay close and watch each other's backs." They moved silently down the hallway, John taking the lead. The first intruder came into view, a man with a bandana covering his face, carrying an assault rifle. John didn't hesitate. He squeezed the trigger. The rifle barked and the man went down, groaning loudly, stifling a scream. The noise alerted the other attackers. More shouts echoed through the house. The attackers spoke Spanish, but with mixed accents. Only some of them were native Spanish accents. John and Mark moved quickly, clearing each room with methodical precision. David covered their rear, his hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. John and the boys entered the living room. 3 more intruders. The room erupted in a flurry of gunfire. John took cover behind the sofa, firing in controlled bursts. Mark and David flanked the attackers, their movements coordinated and efficient. Within moments, the invaders were down. "Is everyone okay?" John asked, scanning the room and breathing heavily. Mark nodded, patting himself and his brother down, looking for injuries. "Yeah, we're good, I think." David's voice was tense. "Dad, there's more of them outside. I heard them over the radio." John grabbed one of the radios from a fallen attacker, listening intently. The radio chatter confirmed his worst fears. "They're sending in another team. We need to get ready." They quickly searched the bodies, taking weapons and ammunition. None of the attackers had any identifying marks or flags, just black tactical gear. John felt a cold rage building inside him. These weren't just random cartel members looking for a way over the border smuggling drugs or illegals. This was a coordinated attack. "We need to get to the roof," John said, "and we can hold them off from there." They made their way upstairs, setting up positions on the roof. The ranch house provided a good vantage point over the long driveway leading up to the property. John could see headlights in the distance, the second wave of attackers approaching. "Mark, David, get ready," John said, his voice steady. "We have to hold them off from here. Don't let them get close." The attackers' vehicles came into view, and John took aim. The first shot rang out, hitting the driver of the leading vehicle. It was a BMW jacked up with off-road suspension and a roll cage. The car swerved and flipped onto its roof, blocking the driveway. The attackers scrambled out, taking cover behind their modified and heavily armored pickup trucks. A tense silence fell over the ranch as both sides held their breath, waiting for it to start. Then, all at once, the air was filled with the sound of gunfire. John, Mark, and David fired in quick succession, their training taking over as their minds stepped back. John's AR-15 jammed, and he cursed under his breath, quickly clearing the malfunction. Mark shouted a warning as a group of attackers tried to flank them. John and David shifted their positions, cutting off the attackers' advance. The fight was a frenetic mess of running, diving, scrambling, and running back to the other side of the roof. John moved, aimed, fired, and moved again with practiced ease. He reloaded and fired, his mind focused solely on protecting his family. Mark and David fought with equal ferocity, their bond as brothers and patriots driving them forward. Suddenly, there was a lull in the gunfire. John took a moment to assess the situation. The attackers were regrouping, preparing for another push. He knew they couldn't hold out much longer. "Get ready," John said, his voice hoarse with dust and stress. "Here they come again." The final assault came hard and fast. The attackers rushed the house, determined to breach their defenses and take over. John, Mark, and David fought with everything they had. They caught glimpses of the surviving ranch hands making their own stand outside, but with no way to communicate to them, they might as well have been 1,000 miles away. Hand-to-hand combat ensued as the attackers reached the house, the clash of bodies and weapons echoing through the night. A scream from somewhere behind John pricked his ears. He whirled around in time to see Mark crumple into a heap on the hallway floor as he rushed through a doorway, blood pouring from a wound in his side. A primal rage took over and everything slowed down. He could smell the pungent odor of sulfur, sweat, and a truck burning outside. His son's screams cut through it all, though, and his vigor was renewed. His movements, his thoughts, his decisions, all go into overdrive, fueled by desperation and fury. He dispatched the last of the attackers, his breath coming in ragged gasps. As the dust settled, John dropped to his knees beside Mark. "Hold on, son," he whispered, pressing his hands to the wound. "We're going to get you help." Mark's eyes fluttered, pain etched into his face. "Dad, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Dad. I can still fight. I can't. It's cold." "Don't talk like that, son," John said, his voice breaking. "You're going to be fine." But deep down, he knew the truth. Mark's injuries were too severe. The realization hit him like a sledgehammer, and tears streamed down his face. David knelt beside them, and he burst out in sobs, his own face pale and stricken. "Dad, what do we do?" John looked at his youngest son, seeing the fear and determination in his eyes. He swallowed hard, trying to find the words. "We fight back, David. We make them pay for this. For Mark." As dawn broke over the Arizona desert, the Redmond family emerged from the chaos, battered and down one son, but unbroken. They had defended their home and their loved ones, but the cost was high. John looked out over the wreckage of the lightening dawn, a steely resolve mingling with grief and rage in his heart. "We'll get through this," he said, his voice firm. "We got to get to town. There's going to be more coming." They gathered the remaining supplies, grabbed the girls, and the roar of their pickup truck's engines faded into the desert as the sun rose red.